So hello and welcome to this discussion about the COVID-19 Audience Outlook Monitor with Matthew Morse, Executive Director of Strategy and Programs at Creative Partnerships Australia, and Tandi Palmer Williams, Managing Director of Patternmakers. That's the company that has put this research tool together. I'm Rebecca Mostyn, Director of Research and Knowledge Management at the Australia Council for the Arts. And many of you may have joined us on previous webinars digging into the results of the Audience Outlook Monitor with industry experts. So welcome back if you have, and also welcome if this is the first time you're joining us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm coming to you today, the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many nations throughout Australia that we're gathering from. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge all First Nations peoples present and online in this session. I expect many people may be at least a little bit familiar with the Audience Outlook Monitor by now, but for those who aren't, this is a really important research project that the Australia Council was very keen to support, as were many of our state funding agency colleagues. It's now been a few months since restrictions on public gatherings and travel were put in place in response to COVID-19, which has protected many Australians from the worst effects of this dreadful pandemic, but it's also been devastating for our sector. This project is providing vital information on when audiences might be ready to return to different types of spaces, under what circumstances, and what they're thinking and doing in the meantime. So this is really important for helping all of you in making critical decisions and navigating the coming months, especially as restrictions are starting to ease now. Though with conditions changing day by day, we know that all of these decisions are carrying a high degree of risk. So I'm going to hand over to Matt to kick off the discussion about what the monitor is saying about fundraising, support and marketing. But before I do, just a quick note on registering questions. Please feel free to start sending questions through for Tandi or Matt. And if you could please use the Q&A button to do that. The chat function's there for you for general discussion, so use that as well, please, as you would like to. But we'll be taking questions from the Q&A section. So on that, over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody. Yes, dialing in from freezing cold Melbourne this morning, 1 degree today. From the Ballet Centre, which seems to have some creative life back into it this morning, which is great to see. I can hear a dance class, a virtual dance class taking place right next door to me. So if you do hear a little bit of noise, that is what the cause is. I'm very much looking forward to today's session. I think it's difficult for us to predict the effects of COVID-19 on arts philanthropy. I guess there's no precedent to this situation. You know, we've had recessions that have hit our high net worth supporters and our businesses, but we've never actually had a pandemic that's forced us to close. I guess I come to this situation that we've been placed in with a sense of optimism, a sense of renewal, and also excitement. I think the future is going to be exciting for us working in communications and fundraising within the arts. I think that the great work that we've all done within our organisations in the past, say 2, 5 or 10 years, to better understand and engage with our stakeholders and our supporters in financial and non-financial ways is really going to pay dividends into the future. I guess reflecting on coming into today, I felt that you know, we've built mechanisms for asking for support as a core part of what we do. You know, fundraising no longer exists outside of the artistic practice. It's embedded in our organisations, and everybody in our teams play a role in fundraising. As we all know, fundraising will continue to be a long journey, and unfortunately, we will see a decrease in the short term of financial support. But I think, again, the future will be bright. I just want to reiterate that now is not the time to pause on the great things that we've established. We need to stay connected. We may need to repurpose what our case for support is, provide greater transparency to our donors, to our supporters, just to demonstrate how we are doing financially. But I guess we all understand that this is best practice. And you also, if you've got any questions, you've got the support of Creative Partnerships Australia if you've got any questions around your fundraising strategy. Now, before we just go into the work that Tandi and her team have been doing, I just wanted to look at some stats that are coming out throughout COVID-19. And this is from a report done by John McLeod from JB Weir. It's titled Where to From Here? The Outlook of Philanthropy During and Post COVID-19. Financially, the snapshot predicts that philanthropy on a whole, not just the arts, will be down based on last year's financial earnings of 7%. And this is for the financial year that ends, I think, tomorrow. And we're all fundraising at this point in time. And in the next year, 2021, they see a further fall of 12%. They predict that the fall will continue to happen because there is no assumptions of when things will get back to normal, or when we'll be able to do great things like host face-to-face fundraising events, or see each other in a foyer, or attend live performance. So this is also based on, the last 4 or 5 years, we've had growth on philanthropic giving in Australia of approximately 5 to 6% each year. So with that kind of 19% decrease, we're looking at seeing philanthropic giving going back to levels that we saw in 2012. So 2012 was a good year. So let's not think that that's ultimately terrible. But that's where we see ourselves at the moment. But the promising news is, as a sector, a large group of our supporters are high net worths, and they also give through prescribed ancillary funds. And they rely on the income that comes out of their assets, which relies on a strong financial market. And the good news is that the financial market to date has not been hit as hard as originally predicted. But I caveat that saying that is today, and things may change next week or in a month's time. All of this information we host on the Creative Partnerships Australia website. So please do try and look at those resources and better equip yourself with as much information as you can when making decisions about your communications and your fundraising moving forward. So as Rebecca mentioned, we're going to go through quite a lot of information this morning with Tandi. Please ask as many questions as you can. We've only got an hour, and we really want to maximise the opportunity that we have together with Tandi and myself, and also have a really good look at the dashboard and how we can use that together in our organisations to better equip ourselves with knowledge about what are the sentiments around communications and fundraising in our particular operating environments. So Tandi, I might hand over to you, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Great, thanks Matt. Good morning everyone. I hope you're feeling good today. It's not quite as cold here in Sydney. I'm on Guringai country in Sydney's northern beaches, and yeah, it's another week. We're actually coming up to phase 2 of this research, which is kind of exciting for us. But to get started today, yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, the Australia Council, and for all of you for the privilege to connect with you today and talk about support for our sector and the role that audiences play in supporting our work during the pandemic, or that they could play. And yeah, from all of us at Patternmakers and WolfBrown, who's the international leader of this research, it's really a great honour to be working with you in this way to support you with accurate insights about how audiences feel during the pandemic. So today we'll be sharing data from the first phase of the Audience Outlook Monitor, which was, it's basically a cross-sector collaborative data collection exercise that's involved 159 different organisations of all different sizes and art forms. And for more information about the study and the methodology, you're more than welcome to pop on over to our website. And my colleague Bianca Morlett is going to be sharing some links to other resources associated with the Audience Outlook Monitor today in the chat. And if at any point you've got questions, she may be able to answer those as we go through as well. But basically the data set that we've got that we're going to be talking about has pooled data from 159 different orgs, 23,000 audience members across Australia, And by pulling that into a dashboard, and that dashboard's freely available to you to explore after this session, but we can build a picture of audiences unlike kind of anything we've ever seen before, and identify trends that might not be visible in any individual database. So we can drill down on different audience segments and different topics, and identify trends in how people are feeling. So the data that we're going to be looking at today is collected from past attendees. So that's people who buy tickets to our shows and our exhibitions. They appear in our databases, and they were defined by their attendance at one of our events in the past 2 years. So the findings aren't, representative of the general population. We just need to keep the kind of methodology in mind as we interpret the results. But we've got a range of different snapshots to share with you about support for arts and cultural organisations, and potentially I think they illuminate what the potentially where the opportunities are, and how different audience segments feel about different forms of support right now, and potentially how we can work together to leverage audience insight to grow support for our organisations during this time. So let's leap in. I'm going to share my screen with you now. In a moment, you should see some slides. All right, so in terms of how audiences as a group feel about supporting us, most people that we've heard from, so the 23,000, do feel supportive of our sector in some way. So we know that, and I'm just showing up on screen some stats here that show the proportion of audiences. So 53% say that they're moderately committed to supporting arts and cultural organisations during the pandemic, and 37% say that they are strongly committed. And when we drill down into these groups, the strongly committed people, what we see is that it's very much influenced by how frequently someone attends our events and organisations. So what I'm showing now on screen is that same data point on the left, which with all audiences, but I'm then showing that database broken down into frequency of attendance at performing arts. So this is the performing arts. You can also view it in the dashboard for museum attendance, but basically it shows that for people who attend a couple of times a week, the proportion who are strongly committed grows to 75%, whereas for people who attend a couple of times a year or less, it's only 18%. So frequency of attendance is one of the most important factors in terms of how audiences feel about a whole lot of different things. You would know if you've attended some of the other webinars that frequency of attendance is the strongest predictor behind how ready they are to start attending again. And what they're doing online, all sorts of things. So certainly in terms of fundraising and support, frequent attendees is a really important group to get to know better, and you would all be well across that idea already. So other groups that feel strongly committed are people who work in the arts themselves, no surprises there, and people who are subscribers or members to our organisations. They're also associated with, strong feelings of support. Interestingly, we've collected a bunch of qualitative insights as well from audience members and heard a lot of different reasons why people feel the need to support the sector. And I think there's a fairly good understanding amongst audiences that the sector needs support right now. And in fact, I'm just showing a quote from one person up on the screen now, who said, as an industry that already lacks funding, the pandemic presents hard times ahead. But I also have made an observation that many people who weren't involved in the arts pre-COVID have now gotten involved. So one of the themes in the qualitative data is that awareness of the need to support arts and cultural organisations is potentially growing in some areas. So another important thing to note, however, in relation to that is that people or audiences are fairly likely to be experiencing the financial impacts of the pandemic. So the Audience Outlook Monitor not only probes people's kind of feelings about their health and how that might be a barrier to them reattending, for instance, but also financially. And we know that 38% of audiences, so past attendees, have already experienced a loss of household income due to the pandemic, and we believe that a further proportion feel very cautious about the financial outlook and potentially may be concerned that they will experience the financial outlook, the financial impacts of the pandemic in some way in the next 6 to 12 months, and feel quite cautious about what they're spending money on right now. So although there's quite significant feelings of support, and we've got, a good proportion who feel strongly committed, there is also a proportion who have been financially impacted and feel like they can't show their support financially at this time. So that may, be obvious to many of us, but I just wanted to reiterate that, in fact, when we look at the data, what we see in that strongly committed segment is that they're slightly more likely to be experiencing the financial impacts of the pandemic right now. So the proportion that are experiencing a loss of household income actually increases to 41% compared to 38% among those who feel is strongly committed. So one person has said, I'm showing this up on screen now, I feel strongly committed about supporting the arts. However, I'm currently financially strained and I'm concerned for my future employment, so I'm being conservative in my spending. So in terms of what we see when we look at specific ways that audiences might support us, and I'm going to show a graph now on screen that basically we tested a number of different ways that audiences might participate in supporting one or more organisations in their communities. And you can see that varies from, rebooking for a postponed event through to making a donation, buying merchandise, buying a subscription, that kind of thing. And as you'll see on screen, we're gonna talk about the dark green proportion, so that the proportion that say they are very likely to do these things. So the most common way that people feel likely to support an organisation is rebooking for something that they had booked in the past. When we come to some of the other forms of support, that proportion drops quite significantly. So we see around a quarter say they are very likely to engage in things like, donating the value of unused tickets, buying a voucher, making a donation, or paying for a digital offering, that kind of thing. So we kind of see that, around 1 in 4 attendees are very likely to show their support for arts and cultural organisations financially. One of the things that we notice when we dig into this a little bit more closely is that, we've tested a couple of different types of donations. So donating to a specific artist or organisation versus supporting a general sector support fund, and people are far more likely to say they'll donate to a specific cause. And in the qualitative data, we know that people are very interested in supporting even specific projects and knowing where their money is going, as opposed to more generic offers. So I'm going to show a quote now from an audience member up on screen, which says, "Any spare money I have would be more likely to donate directly to independent artists and small organisations. I would also be more likely to purchase works and tickets directly from independent artists and small organisations, publishers, art collectors and community art centres, as I feel this is where financial hardship will be most acute and support will be most needed." So when we drill into the data, and we can explore this in the dashboard a little bit later in the session if you're interested to, we see that audiences who have come through the databases of smaller organisations actually feel stronger levels of support than larger organisations. So that's something interesting for those of you working in different parts of the sector to pick up on. In terms of apologies. Basically, I'll just share a little bit more about what we know about people who are very likely to donate. So basically, we've talked about how frequent attendees are more likely to feel strongly supportive, and they are the group that are most likely to donate as well. So 44% feel like they're very likely to make a donation versus, what was it overall, 20, closer to a quarter. I'm going to just go back to, sorry, this chart so we can talk about it in a sec. There we go. So other groups who are likely to donate, so we can see that there's some trends related to age, location and household income. So making a donation is slightly more common amongst those aged 75 and over, those who earn a household income over, you know, $3,000 a week, that kind of thing. Metropolitan audiences are slightly more likely to make a donation than regional or remote audiences. And across different art forms, the likelihood to donate is relatively similar across different art forms, but we know that audiences of First Nations, arts and culture are more likely to donate. That's kind of indicative of that audience segment being very strongly committed to the arts overall. So I thought I'd just ask for those of you participating in the session, I'd love you to introduce yourself in the chat and what you've noticed about donations during this time if you're working in fundraising. Actually, if we could show the poll first, that would be great. Lena or Catherine, I'm not sure who's showing the poll today, but I'd love to know a little bit more about you before we get into some of these questions. So which of these best describes your role? If you can complete that poll now. So whether you're in fundraising yourself in an arts organisation, if you're in marketing or another role or some other category, it'd be great just to get a read from you before we get any further.
So Tandi, while people are just filling in what describes their role, I guess some of the observations that I've seen from that first couple of slides there is, you know, relationships for your art form is not just about asking money for money today, but it's about essentially keeping people engaged so that in due course, if they have a strong relationship with your organisation and what you do and what your outcomes are, when they're in a stronger financial position, they may actually give a gift. So I think, you know, don't say we're not going to talk to these people because we don't think that they're going to be able to provide us with support today. I think we've got to be thinking always about the long term and the stewardship of everybody in their relationship with our organisation. And I guess I'm not surprised also to see that if we're looking at the level of engagement versus people donating tickets, if people do have a higher level of engagement with our organisation, I can generally see those patterns that have come up in that chart there. So let's have a look.
Yeah, so we've got a bit over a third each in fundraising and marketing. Another quarter of participants are in management of an arts and cultural organisation. We've got some independent artists or practitioners, and some fundraising consultants, and then other category 15%. So thank you very much for that. That's really helpful for us to know your role and your interests. And yeah, in the chat, if you are in fundraising, we'd love to just hear any observations you've made in your organisation about the segments that you have found to be most likely to donate during the pandemic. Anything you've learned. Sessions like this are great for us to be sharing what we know. So in terms of what one of the other things we've noticed about people donating during this time is a lot of questions actually from people about who want to show their support about wanting guidance on, you know, how to do that or potential opportunities for them to donate to different causes or what level to donate. So I'll just show you one quote briefly now on screen, which is from an audience member who's asked, what is a suitable amount to donate? i.e. if you'd pay $10 for a live show, $5 for online / any is appreciated. For subscriptions, what is to be expected? So I think out there we've got some very mature donors who you know, who are very experienced in terms of the causes that they support and how they're able to do that. There's also a lot of audiences out there who might be making relatively small amounts, but who might be newly awakened to the causes that are, you know, worth considering in their lives. And so we've seen, picked up on in the qualitative data, a bit of a gap for some audiences in terms of how to go about making a donation. So that's something to think about. All right, so in terms of some of the other forms of support, I'll just go back to this chart now. Some of the other things that we've tested are whether someone might make, you know, buy a subscription or a membership, even if some of the events might be cancelled. And we heard that around a fifth, so 18%, say they are very likely to do that. And that we've asked the people who are already members and subscribers if they plan to continue their membership into 2021. And 82% of those said yes, they are. A minority are actually don't know yet or say no. And for them, the impact of the event, of the pandemic on events and what that membership or subscription is definitely going to include is leading to some of that hesitation. We also asked about buying vouchers, so prepaying for, say, tickets that they could use in future. And what we found is that buying a voucher is actually something that less frequent attendees are open to considering. So for the 25% of our audience database that's out there who only attend the arts events a few times a year, buying a voucher for future attendance is one of the things that they are most likely to do. So it suggests that when we think about asking for a donation, that propensity is very much linked with frequency of attendance. However, a gift voucher campaign might be applicable to a broader segment of audience members, including people who haven't attended that much lately. Similarly, with merchandise offers, we found that this is really resonating amongst younger audiences and those for comedy and contemporary music. So it is quite art form driven. And yeah, again, for those people who attend less frequently, buying merchandise is something that they are relatively more open to than other audiences. So one of the big trends of this time has been around engaging online, and donations actually linked with online content. And we asked those people who are engaging online at this time, and then we've got a whole fact sheet about online engagement with you, which you're more than welcome to explore. But in terms of what's motivating people to participate online, we know that more than a third of audiences say that they're actually motivated to participate online to support an organisation that they feel is important. And again, frequent attendees are most likely to be doing that. But over a third of audiences say that they're doing online arts and cultural activities more frequently during the pandemic, and many of these say that they plan to continue after the pandemic. So we've talked a bit in some of the other webinars about that need for long-term strategic thinking about online content and those opportunities. But I want to just talk today about how online content is linked with fundraising. So when we collected the data for phase 1 in May, at that point, 9% of audiences had subscribed to an online platform to access content on demand. So like a monthly subscription for guitar lessons, for instance. 12% had purchased a single experience, like a pay-per-view ticket to an event, that kind of thing. And 19% had made a donation as an expression of gratitude for something that they'd experienced. So what we've heard is actually that the ability of arts organisations to make content available for free and simply say make a donation if you've experienced that has been quite well received actually by audiences. And when we ask audience members what's been most memorable about the online content that they've experienced during this time, we've heard about that the donation offer has actually been one of the things that they've valued. So one person has said, and I'm showing this up on screen now, that the availability, what's been most memorable is the availability of international experiences and things that they wouldn't normally expect to see. And being available for free. Having the choice to donate to a freely available artists or organisation's work made me feel good. So we've heard quite a bit in the qualitative data that pay what you can kind of model is resonating quite strongly, and there's signs that we could actually be making more of this as a sector. So another person has said, I have not come across options to support the artist financially. FYI, I watched a live performance of a singer-songwriter, an artist paint a picture, and attended Zoom karaoke. Neither of these asked for small contributions to their work. So one of the things that we're kind of curious about is whether we could be making that more obvious in terms of our online content, and helping people go ahead with that by reminding them, that kind of thing. So I think there's potentially a case for us to be a little bit more bold in terms of how we're marketing that ask online. And it's another, I guess, factor in this research which suggests that, you know, in our organisations, really connecting fundraising with the digital team and the marketing team and all working together to connect those dots is a real opportunity. And I think the pandemic has really brought all of this to the fore in terms of online content. So I'll show some of the stats now, which really suggest that as a sector, there's room to potentially use online distribution more to grow support online. So in our dashboard, you can explore this in more detail, but basically 34% of audiences have recently paid for an online arts experience, and double that say that they're somewhat or very likely to do so in future. So we think that there's some market potential there. 56% of those paying for an experience have paid via a donation. So I think that model is really resonating. 36% of those paying have spent more than $50. And within the dashboard, we've got a filter so you can explore audiences who have paid more than $50. You know, what are their characteristics and what are they doing? And there is an age trend here. So under 35s are the most likely group to have paid for an online experiences, but over 75s are the most likely age group to be spending more. So younger audiences are paying more frequently, perhaps smaller amounts, but older audiences are paying more, that they're engaging less. And we're actually finding an interesting trend in terms of age, in terms of online discovery. So younger people are more likely to be discovering new things, whereas older audiences are more likely to be patronising those organisations and causes that they already know and love. So Matt, I'd love to ask you what your kind of reflections are about fundraising in the digital space, and anything you've kind of found interesting about what you've seen online during this time. And for anyone who wants to share their observations in the chat, I think it would be a great time if you have learnings to share about what's worked for you in the online space, or how your fundraising team has worked with the digital team during the pandemic. I'd love to hear that too.
Thanks, Tandi. I guess I wasn't completely surprised by the figure of 19% of people supporting through digital means financially to what they've seen or watched, because a lot of the content that I've been viewing through COVID has been free content, but also they haven't actually asked for support. And I guess if we don't ask and we don't make that case that we need their financial support at this particular time, and also make it very easy for them to support you by either directing them, say, to your webpage or through to the Australian Cultural Fund. If you're an independent artist and you don't qualify for the unique tax charity status, you can register a campaign on the Australian Cultural Fund, and you can facilitate donations through that platform, and your donors receive a tax receipt for that. I guess thinking about digital content, I guess I'm a little bit wary. I think if there's got to be a fine balance moving forward about what your organisation's principles are into the future, about what you can deliver digitally within your means, and then also what you're going to be able to produce live. And I guess organisations need to think about what their strategic priorities are, and apply the appropriate resources there, because I know personally that sometimes trying to put up great quality digital content can be quite expensive. But then on the flip side, we've seen some great innovation through COVID-19. For example, even if I just go through my Instagram feed, the Queensland Ballet have just done a series of 60 days with their artists. That's not so much about me going to make a donation to them, but I'm actually engaging with their artists and what they're doing in isolation. It's 20 seconds a day. And then there's more lengthy things that are happening. For example, ATYP in Sydney, they've got this great initiative, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to get it wrong. And this is about engaging the youth that participate in their programs. They've engaged 11 Australian playwrights to write 5-minute scripts that you at home can download and perform with your family and friends. And then post that, you can film that and send that back into ATYP, and you can star on their YouTube channel. So I guess, the impact there is the great brand awareness of ATYP in your home, in any situation. And mums and dads actually go, this is fantastic. This is keeping my children engaged, which might also mean that it's some time off for me. And it could either result in mums and dads making a donation when the Case for Support end of financial year campaign goes around, or actually it might mean that more young people register to do their activities moving forward. So it's a growth for the business there. I think I've also seen quite a lot of organisations saying, can you make a donation as best as you can to watch, say, a play reading? I think there's a fine balance about what you can ask for money for and what you can't, I guess, depending on the level of quality there. But the bottom line is, if you're keeping what you do and what your cause is and what your impact is out there in the market, people aren't going to forget about you. But then the flip side is, don't send them far too much either. So, yes.
All right. Well, we might get back into some of the data now around how people, how receptive people are to different messages and the communications that arts and cultural organisations are putting out at this time. So basically, I've already showed this. Sorry, I'm getting so. In terms of communications preferences, we tested a number of different topics with audiences, and only 5% said that none of the options were interesting to them, which I think is a good sign. What we had the most positive feedback from audiences was really about content and events. So 56%, we asked people to choose 2 from this list, and the most popular choices were notices about upcoming online events and digital offerings and plans for future live events. So as a rule, audiences are most interested in audience-centric offers that benefit them. So most interested in content and events that are coming up, basically. In terms of communications about how we in the arts are faring in our organisations, that's less interesting than the kind of content related topics. However, generally the qualitative data that we've collected confirms that audiences do appreciate, the need for communication to keep in touch during this time. And we've seen that although some of the topics like, how the organisation's faring, how to support organisations are less kind of popular, people do understand the importance of those. And I think what's clear in the data is that different segments have different appetites for different types of communications. So members and subscribers have stronger appetites for more information, and they want to hear from management, they want to hear from artists and creatives. And so there's definitely a case for segmentation and targeting of our EDMs, for instance. That won't be a surprise to you. So again, people who attend the performing arts regularly are more likely to want updates associated with from artists associated with the organisations, and audiences who are likely to make a donation are also more interested in these updates compared to those who aren't. So certainly I think there's a case for segmenting the audience, you know, your audience database by frequency of attendance and their past donation behaviour, and feeding them with more information and more regularly than other segments. So I mean, another thing that sort of comes through in terms of the qualitative data is that there's a big group who feel strongly supportive but who aren't able to financially at this time, and so there could be a way to arm people with other ways to show their support. So, you know, ways that people could show their support through non-financial means is by, you know, sharing messages of support with the creatives in their lives, signing petitions and sharing news about government support for the arts. Certainly sharing works that they love with friends and family is a really powerful way to support us. Things like organising watch parties and Zoom catch-ups to watch works with friends. And I think one of the, you know, smartest things that some audiences could do is actually show their parents how to have a big screen experience from a cultural organisation at home on their television. So by projecting from their phone onto their TV so that they can enjoy a concert or a performance, for instance, on their TV, and have more of that high quality kind of cinematic experience. And the benefit of that, particularly amongst older audience segments, is likely to have a lot of flow-on benefits financially for us as well. So there are definitely ways that these people who feel strongly supportive can show their support by non-financial means, and I think potentially we can be prompting more of that in our communications. One other thing to note is that generally audiences are more receptive to updates from artists and creatives over the kind of more corporate messages. So for instance, one person has said, the more personal the story and the nature of the storytelling provides an authentic connection to how the organisation is faring rather than corporate high-level communications. So certainly thinking about who our EDMs are coming from, what the subject line is, what the content of those messages are all really important in getting cut through with our EDMs, for instance, right now. And the subject line, you know, update from the CEO might not be as appealing to audience members as potentially a story from an artist associated with your organisation. And the more personal the story, the better, because obviously, particularly at a time like this, where people are dealing with the impacts of isolation, there's that search for kind of meaning and authentic connection during this time, which we've talked about in several of the different webinars. So the more that we can tap into that, the better. We'll just mention that some audiences are starting to feel a little bit fatigued, and I think that's come through in our qualitative data in terms of feeling overwhelmed with what's out there and feeling that there has been kind of over communication in some areas. My personal interpretation is that that's only a problem where it's leading people to unsubscribe. So I think, as always, there's just a clear need to monitor the stats for signs of engagement and disengagement. And I actually thought I'd just share some of the tips that have, you know, sprung to my mind coming out of the data on audience support and communications. So as we talked about, obviously, I think this data set confirms the case to segment and target your database for fundraising and comms during this time, and to monitor the stats in each segment for signs of that engagement or disengagement. That's going to be the main way we know if we're sending asks too often. I think we should be careful who and how often we ask for donations, because that propensity to donate varies quite markedly across different audience segments, and we see that frequent attendees are very open to that, whilst infrequent attendees are much less so. So I think we should be asking those people much less often and potentially different types of offers. I think we can up the ante on donations linked with content, but absolutely take on board your point, Matt, about being clear on what our digital strategies are and what we stand for, and where the boundaries are with that. I think we could give guidance about how to support, you know, some guidance for people who are new to making donations and potentially have at this time been more activated, or for those who haven't been financially impacted, we're seeing signs that they are using their buying power and want to show by what they're spending money on at this time, be more conscious in their decisions and use their buying power to support organisations that they care about. And then also offering ways for people to show their support through non-financial means. So we know that already more than a third of our audience have been financially impacted, and a greater still proportion are being cautious, and they're worried about the outlook with the recession and potentially the impacts of the pandemic, the financial impacts hanging around a lot longer than the health impacts. So I think we should potentially in our own fields and organisations think about what are those ways that we want audiences to be able to support us through non-financial means, and how can we leverage this desire to support during this time to, say, reach more people or further a cause that we care about, or play that long game in terms of building that relationship, so that when things do pick up financially, we've got a really engaged group of donors there ready for us. So I would like to show the dashboard and potentially take some questions, but before I do that, and Matt, perhaps you can facilitate that, but Bianca in my team is just going to show us some of the resources that are available to you to do with other topics, so you can have an explore of those in your own time, and then we'll facilitate some Q&A with the dashboard, and Matt will take over from there.
Thanks, Tandi. Hi, everyone. My name's Bianca Millett, and I'm the Senior Research Analyst at Patternmakers. I'd firstly also like to give my acknowledgements of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on which I live and work, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm just going to share my screen because I'd like to show you some useful links that Tandi mentioned. 1 second. All right, can everyone see my screen now? Yep. Awesome. So this is our homepage, thepatternmakers.com.au. So if I click here, this is our landing page for the Audience Outlook Monitor, which contains the fact sheet for support and fundraising, as well as key findings from our initial snapshot report on the national level. A link to the dashboard, and here are our most recent fact sheets. So here is the one of this week's topic, and then the other topics we've been exploring in this webinar series. And if you just go to the dashboard page, to access the dashboard, you'll just need to use these login credentials and then click through to the access the dashboard page. And then we've also got, scrolling down, the fact sheets, and then further down we've got the questionnaire here, which is the survey questions we used in the Audience Outlook Monitor, in case that's useful for you in doing your own surveying at any point. So here you can download the questions. It's like a PDF, sorry, a Word document. So we're also approaching phase 2 of data collection next week, which is due to commence on July 8th. All the participating organisations will hear from us this week with further instructions. And this round of data collection will focus on basically what's changed in audience sentiment since May. And we'll narrow in on a few key areas of interests right now. So if you want to stay in touch, on our COVID-19 page, we've got a little section here where you can subscribe for updates. So all you need to do is enter your email address and then check COVID-19 Audience Outlook Monitor and then subscribe. So we normally send out EDMs with the latest fact sheet every week, and you'll get more updates about phase 2 as well. And then any other questions, you can contact us at info@thepatternmakers.com.au. I'll pop that email address in the chat box. And yeah, so that's all from me. Thank you. Over to Tandi or Matt, I'm not sure who.
Thanks, Bianca.
No worries.
Everyone, that's an amazing resource. So I would definitely be, if you haven't already, I'd be subscribing to that e-news and tailor it to what your needs are, but also bookmark this where the resource is, where the dashboard is. So how about let's do a bit of a dive into the dashboard and see how we all can use it within our organisations with the data that's in there at the moment. And I must say that people, we need some more questions. So please.
So whilst if anyone wants to pop a question in the Q&A, I will just show you a bit about how the dashboard works. So on screen, you should be able to see it now. And I'm just going to navigate to the communications and fundraising report, which is within the dashboard. This is where you can apply different filters to show results that are relevant to you. So you can tick on and off different jurisdictions, and this is where you'll toggle the different waves of data collection to when they become available. For now, I'll just have them all on, and I'm going to show the data all together rather than by survey, which actually splits out these different surveys. In terms of filters, there's a number of different filters to do with the organisations that are participating. So we can look at staff size, for instance, now. And once the filters are applied, you just need to tick apply options to then display the data. So you can apply 2 filters at once. So as well as characteristics of the organisations, we can look at a whole lot of demographic characteristics for the audience member themselves and their past participation in arts and culture. So we can look at different art forms, things like whether they're a member or a subscriber, and if they're experiencing financial impact, their risk tolerance for going out right now, all of that kind of thing. So there's plenty of there to play with. So let's have a look at how organisational staff size affects how people feel about supporting us. So I think I mentioned earlier in the session that audience members associated with small and micro organisations feel more strongly committed. So as you can see here, the proportion here is of strongly committed is higher for those size organisations relative to larger organisations. And again, in terms of how likely they are to show their support, you know, it's quite consistent on some measures. One area that they're more likely to engage with is making a donation to a specific artist or organisation that's important. So I think that there's some exciting potential for small organisations to be leveraging this time in terms of donations. As well, I'll just show you the frequency of attendance, which is obviously one of the most important factors. So again,
if I'm say I'm a dance company based in Sydney, small to medium size, how would I navigate the dashboard? So to the particular organisation?
So I would focus on the New South Wales data, for instance, and you might look at, for instance, the organisation's region type. So this would focus on, you know, metropolitan-based, or you'd be able to see metropolitan audiences in New South Wales. So here you can see that, for instance, people in metropolitan areas are more likely to say they're interested in upcoming online events and digital offers compared to regional remote audiences. You can also, instead of comparing the region type, you can also just select metropolitan organisations only. And then within that, you can select different art forms. So there's different ways that you can explore the art forms. Types of arts and culture attended would give you dance, whereas types of arts and culture attended grouped would give you performing arts. So the dance filter, there's quite a long list of these organisations, so it'll just take a moment to come up. But whilst that's loading, perhaps we can look at the Q&A.
Okay.
So here it's loaded now. So we've got New South Wales metropolitan organisations shown, and for dance you can see here the responses in terms of dance. So you know, dance audiences are amongst the most strongly committed compared to some other art forms. First Nations are already, as I've mentioned, a very strongly committed audience segment. Dance as well. So there you go. That's a little taste of how you can start to compare the data by different art forms. I mean, as I've mentioned, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that the data is quite consistent, isn't it, across a lot of different art forms. So really what we're seeing across different parts of the sector is quite consistent by art form. Where we start to see really big differences is, as I've said, in terms of frequency of attendance. So how someone has behaved in the past is a really, one of the strongest predictors of how they feel right now in the pandemic and how they'll be participating in future.
So Tandi, this is really a great portal that we should be showing our executive directors or people, decision makers within our organisation, because we know that there's much data that we can have on hand that can help us navigate the decision-making process. This knowledge is absolute power. So once again, everyone should be in there and playing around with it, because there's so many opportunities for how you can ask questions of the results. And I guess also, and if the second wave of the survey is coming out soon, you'll be able to measure it against the two sets of data, which is fantastic, especially if
That's right.
About what are you doing in 12 months or 18 months time. We're putting our very limited resources into for maximum impact.
So there's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I'll just touch on now. So one of the questions, does the survey ask if they were a donor to an arts organisation in the past? We don't have a setting for that at the moment. So we do have member or subscriber status, not past donor. We also have whether they have paid online or not in the past, or whether they've spent over $50, but not purely donations. So that's something we're actually looking to add in the next phase of data collection. So in a couple of weeks, you can check back and analyse for past donors. And then someone else has asked, have you looked at whether audience members are more likely to direct their support to bushfire relief funds, COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter? How are people viewing requests for art support with other requests? That's not something we've touched on in this particular study. I wonder if, Matt, you've got any insights to share about that?
The insights that I can provide is in regards to the bushfire relief funds. And they're what we call mass market fundraising campaigns. So as you would remember, there was like the big concerts on televisions where people would dial up and make a donation. There was a generous outpour of giving, but then we saw once COVID started to kick in, there was another mass fundraising event, which was the Royal Children's Hospital's Good Friday Appeal. And this was the first indicator to show that there is an impact, because people had been through the bushfires, the floods, and also we were on the brink of COVID, that in the first time in its history, it only raised half of what it raised in the previous year through that mass marketing fundraising. And the Victorian government had to step in and make up the shortfall there as a gesture of goodwill. I think we will have more of this data on hand, at the end of the financial year. I think we'll look forward to seeing that. I just also wanted to look at another question here that from somebody saying, it's the setup of receiving donations that's so tricky. Back-end systems and tax implications need to be factored in. It's not easy. Well, actually, there is a really easy solution for that, and that is the Australian Cultural Fund. And Creative Partnerships Australia facilitates that fund, and it's where you as an organisation or as an independent artist can use our DGR status to receive donations to Creative Partnerships Australia, and we gift them out to you as a grant, as the artist or the organisation, and we provide the tax deduction to your donor. And we do all of the back end receipting and so forth for you for a 5% fee. So there is a solution there, and I think more organisations and more independent artists need to know about the Cultural Fund, because there isn't a barrier there to be asking for donations. We're really fortunate, and I'd love to see more people using the fund.
So just a couple of other questions. We've had some about art form and someone asking about visual arts. So as I've mentioned, you can look at types of arts and culture attended to see the results for visual arts. As I've mentioned, across different art forms, they are very similar. So basically for any arts and cultural organisation, you can explore this data and get some real meaningful insights. The differences by art form are relatively small. By location and organisation size, there are some differences. I encourage you to pop on and have an explore of those. In terms of, someone else has asked, what are your thoughts around building a new donor circle with high net worth individuals at this time? Do you think this would be well received? Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, my conclusion in terms of, you know, what this is a good time for, I think it is a good time for building relationships and feelings, tapping into that feelings of support and how we leverage that for stronger connections. I think it's probably a tough year financially for fundraising, but it's a really good year for growing that support base and looking at how we reach out into our communities and really serve people during this time with what they need.
It's a really interesting question. I think if you want to create a circle of high net worth individuals, you obviously would want to have a very strong relationship with all of those people if you're inviting them to join a circle and make a financial contribution to your organisation. I would definitely be having conversations with, you know, behind the scenes, trying to test the waters to find out whether or not there is that capacity at the moment for those individuals to give, or because some of the situations might play out is that you might be able to include some people might not be in that financial position at this particular moment in time, and they might be a dedicated supporter that otherwise, without COVID-19, would have had the ability to support you. So I think really do your homework there. And I think there might be other ways to keep people engaged and supporting you through COVID-19 with the concept of stewarding them into your donor circle in due course. Now, I noticed that we're just over time. So Rebecca, I might throw back to you at the Australia Council. And once again, just finally from me, thank you, Tandi and the team, Bianca and Rebecca and everybody for making this session happen. And also, I just wanted to say one thing before I do sign off. Creative Partnerships Australia does a biannual survey on private sector support for arts and culture, and it's called Giving Attitude. We are going out with the next iteration of that survey in the next couple of months. So I encourage you all to look out for that survey, fill that survey out because we need more people participating. And this will be the first time that we will be able to capture art-specific information around philanthropy and business partnerships and volunteering through COVID-19. So we need everybody to participate, and I thank you in advance.
Yeah, I think the Audience Outlook Monitor has showed what the power is when we all get behind these data collection exercises. It is really remarkable. So thanks again to everyone who's been involved in the Audience Outlook Monitor so far, and I hope that we can continue to bring you some useful insights through the next couple of months as things continue to change.
Thanks, Tandi and Matt. And yes, it's been pretty epic, the numbers that have been able to be collected through this, this project and the number of organisations that have collaborated on it. So thanks everyone for your questions, and sorry if we haven't been able to get to your question today. If you do have any further questions, just keep in touch with the Australia Council or with Patternmakers. I think we're going to have some, yes, we've got some email addresses on the screen now. And huge thanks again to Matthew and Tandi and Bianca and everyone who's participated in the discussion. And as Tandi mentioned, you can go to our website and to the Patternmakers website and access all of the fact sheets and the slides and the recordings of this webinar, as well as all of the previous webinars that have happened. So, and yeah, and the next stage of research is sort of fast approaching. So please keep in touch. Please keep your eye on the websites and on all of our social feeds. And thank you again, and goodbye for now.